Michael Borges, thank you so much for being here. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
I really wish, do you have this online?
Yes.
Okay, this is a very helpful item, what you've put together here. You guys have put together, and I guess this is because you guys are numbers-oriented organization, you're business officials, this is what you do, a comparison of all of the proposals that have come out to date, right? And
Correct.
I assume that you'll expand it still further when the legislature puts out their respective
Correct.
one-house budgets.
Yes.
So we can look at just, arguably, we'll start with something easy, the overall education increase, and see what you wanted, what ACB wanted, what the regents wanted,
Right.
what the governor proposed,
Yes.
and it's all neatly done. Thank you
Yes.
so much.
So easy, yes. That's our goal in life, to make things easy.
I really appreciate it. So, we've been talking to a bunch of folks in the education world,
Right.
and we've talked sort of quite a bit about the overall increase, and also foundation aid versus gap elimination, et cetera. I mean, of all of these numbers, and the vast differences between them, or not so vast, which of them do you think is the biggest problem?
Well, I think the governor saw that all these proposals were in the $2 billion range.
Yeah.
So what does he do? He comes out with a $2 billion, plus proposal, but if you read the fine print, it's over 2 years. So he responds to the fact that the regents and the educational organizations that are lobbying for public school funding are in the $2 billion range. He comes out with a $2 billion proposal. And so the headline is, Governor proposes $2 billion increase in school aid.
Great headline.
And nobody reads the fine print to
Right.
figure out that it's over 2 years. So,
Okay,
yeah.
so that's going to be a problem.
Yes. Yeah.
And but there's also a lot of other stuff in here that we know is going to be problematic right off the bat. So we could just say charter schools. The governor again making charter school proposals.
Right, mostly limited to New York City, which most of us don't represent. But yes, it could be an issue. Well, I think what folks missed was that this year's proposal, the $991 million for this year, is actually less than last year. The governor actually proposed $1.06 billion.
Yeah, but last year there was a catch.
Well, there's a
Last year
catch,
was,
but
you
yeah.
can get this higher number, or you can get this lower number. You can get the higher number if you accept all my reforms, which I've stuffed in the budget language, which
True,
you have to
which-
accept
yeah,
anyway.
yes.
But then they worked it out.
Right.
And
But
then,
it's a lower number. I mean, this year is actually lower than last year,
Yep.
I think, and as everybody has said, it's sort of inadequate, especially in a year where everybody recognizes that the tax cap will be at zero, not at close to zero. So yeah, I mean it's a good first start. It's a good negotiating point. But I think we're hoping the legislature will obviously add to it and get us to a number that's more acceptable.
yeah, I mean, I'm also surprised that the executive doesn't mention professional development. I mean, I thought that was like a real big point when you have the continuum of teacher performance evaluations, which of course are on hold at this
Right,
point. But
right.
the whole purpose of evaluating people, or at least they keep saying the purpose of evaluating people, is to help them be better teachers. And if you are in fact not performing up to snuff, then you would get assistance. Isn't that what professional development's all about?
Correct, yes. I think professional development was sort of the buzzword when you had to deal with Common Core and APPR, but now that Common Core APPR is sort of like off the table as a flashpoint, he's moved on to community schools, the new buzzword in education. So, I think the governor sort of sees where the trends are headed and where the headwinds are going, and goes in the opposite direction, or towards where the people are in favor of certain things.
Also explain to us, because there's been some confusion about this, the star rebate switch.
Well, yeah, it's not so much of a switch as that, when people buy a home for the first time or move into a community, a lot of times I think they end up missing their star rebate. So I think what the governor's proposal is intended to address is that for those folks who miss the deadline or somehow miss the local property tax reduction from the star rebate, they can actually apply for it through their state income taxes and get it that way.
So it doesn't change those folks who are getting a rebate now in the
Right,
system. So
right.
it's new home ownership
Right.
going forward.
Yes, as far as we understand it, and we're still seeking clarification from the governor's office, but as far as we understand it, it's only for new home buyers, new people moving into your school district who may have not have qualified for the star rebate or filed the papers in time to get it through their property taxes.
Okay, so that obviously is, we're going to have to keep tabs on that, because it's a little bit tricky. And there are a lot of sort of tricky nuances in here. Now, the administration did a briefing for all of the education folks and managed to answer some of your questions, but there's still some outstanding issues.
Yeah, there's, we're looking for, some clarifications on some of the issues. This was a simpler budget than last year's. I think other guests of yours have alluded to the fact that a lot of the more controversial issues have been put aside and the decks have sort of been cleared. And so the focus is really on how much.
Right.
And not so much as to what we're going to spend the money on, and that's really key. Again, the 991, only 189 for GEA restoration out of the 434 that's owed. There's only 266 in foundation aid when you're owed 4.2 billion. So I mean, the numbers really here are more significant than any policy stuff. And the fact that thankfully this year we actually had school aid runs to go with. So
yeah.
Which is a plus over last year as well.
Also there's a lawsuit out there.
Several, yeah.
And so how's that going to impact? I mean, is there an expectation that there will be a settlement or an agreement or a decision, and how's that going to impact this negotiation period?
Well, again, the courts can rule in favor of the plaintiffs in this case.
Which is what we saw happen in CFE.
Right, and still things could not change. So it's very difficult, I think, for the judicial system to force the hand of the governor and the legislature to do something that they don't want to do or just don't have the resources to do. So, I think it's a good moral victory if we ultimately win those decisions. But in terms of the bottom line, how much money we're going to get, the state can't print money. So even if they award us $2 billion or $4 billion or whatever the number is, there's only so much to go around. So
yeah, and there's no enforcement mechanism,
right.
Or at the very least, the courts have been reluctant. I mean, there's supposedly a separation between the judicial branch and the executive branch, and they're supposed to be keeping a check upon one another. For example, the judicial branch relies on the executive branch for its budget. Yeah. And often judges sort of decline to get involved in squabbles internally in government. In the case of CFE, it was a victory certainly, but there's no enforcement, and so the courts have never stepped in and said we mandate that you pay X, Y, or Z in terms of some sort of schedule.
Right, and again, it's more of a moral victory. Sort of gives us added credibility in asking for additional funds and help prompt the new foundation aid formula that was created back in 2007. But again, it's the separation of the branches of government.
Another thing that's going to be happening this year. Well, first of all, we're going to have to get a new chancellor.
Yeah.
It turns out the vice chancellor's not in the running,
right? Which
was a little bit of a surprise for some people. There's going to be another.
Nice they didn't like him, so it was.
Well, there you go. There's going to be another round of elections for Regents members, and that's going to be potentially contentious. And you've got a review being conducted by the SED commissioner, Mary Ellen Elia, who's really in her first full year of this thing.
Right.
So you've got a lot of balls in the air. Does any of that impact the conversations that are going to be happening?
Well,
in your opinion?
The regents came out with their proposal, in a timely manner, and any new regents coming on board won't affect these negotiations. The regents have already done their part in this process. So yeah, I mean, what's interesting though, I think they really need to start looking at the qualifications of regents, getting more practitioners, more experts in education policy, especially in school finance. And also,
Are you declaring your candidacy?
No,
okay,
no, but
I
actually did apply once when I was the head of the library association.
There you go.
But didn't get very far. But they should have some sort of orientation. They don't have orientation for new regents. So a lot of them have to play catch up in terms of knowing what's going on and in terms of the policies and procedures and things like that. So yeah, I mean, there'll be a lot of changes, in the regions at SED. The SED's suffering another brain drain. There's an opening at their deputy commissioner for K-12, and there's openings in a lot of other key areas at SED. So they need to fill those positions as well.
And also, and we're going to run out of time, but I also want to put this out there. You have the possibility of a real rushed negotiation this year because it is an election year, and it is the sort of thing where everybody tends to want to get out of Dodge as quickly as possible and get things done as quickly as possible, though there's money to fight over this time around, so you never know.
One of the other disappointing parts, I think, in the governor's budget is that there was no mandate relief.
Right.
We have we have a 0% tax cap. We have a minimal increase so far in school aid. They're not doing anything to reduce our expenses, and I was kind of disappointed that wasn't included as well. So.
Well, this obviously is something that we are going to be looking at because it's education and healthcare, which are the two largest portions of the budget, make up the biggest pieces of the budget, and education, yet again, high on the list of things that are probably going to be pretty contentious. So you'll be back, Michael Borges.
Sure.
I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.